From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there, and welcome to another edition of Chicago Newsroom right here on Can TV, and I am Ken Davis. We're all Illinoisans, so we all kind of get it. You know, we all have this inferiority complex about living in the state with the most screwed up budget and the most screwed up financing and the most political infighting. But when our governor stands up and says what happened over the last couple of days was stunning, it was a stunning failure, that kind of raises the bar even for us, doesn't it? So we called in two of the reporters who I respect the most, who really know how to put this into perspective, one from Springfield and one from Chicago. Dave McKinney from Reuters is here. Glad to have you, Dave. Thanks for dropping by. I really appreciate you being here today. And Hal Dardick, who writes about City Hall for the well-known Chicago Tribune. Glad to have you guys, both of you here. The thing that you wrote about it's actually on the front page of this morning's Tribune, is really frightening to me. Forrest Claypool says, we're probably not going to be able to open the schools in September. There's no money. We don't have reserves. We've gone through them all. So, 400, 500,000 kids won't be able to go to school in September unless this is resolved. Is that real? Is he just posturing? Is that?
I don't think he's posturing. If you look at the finances of the Chicago Public Schools, they have about $20 million in their bank account, and with the kind of payroll that they have, that's pennies.
That's hours.
Right. That's a few days, Yeah. And they don't have the ability, like some other districts, to borrow money. They have a junk bond rating. They had to pay a really high 7.5% interest rate the last time they borrowed money. And the markets would probably next time would just say, no, we're not even going to loan to you, or we're going to do it at such exorbitant prices that it's untenable. So he can't do any of the things that you would do in a crisis. There's no reserves to spend. They won't open. I think he's right. And the other thing that I found equally scary, and I think he knows, what's going on in other school districts, is that he says there's a lot of school districts. It's not just Chicago that wouldn't be able to open. And even the ones that have a nice reserve, a lot of them would open for 30 days, 60 days, and run out of money. So talk about pressure points.
Yeah. And it's even worse than that for the rich schools that have a few million in the bank. They won't see that get reimbursed, right? I mean, they're not going to get it back, so they're going to draw down their reserves, and then maybe the state comes along with money. But it's just bad. It's bad. Right.
Well, one hoped they would pay them in arrears, but who knows? Yeah. I mean, the state is so low on money itself.
Right. Well, Dave, you were at the other end of this telescope. I guess you were there on the big night, right? On Tuesday night, when everything just kind of went all to hell. God, it's not new. We've been around for a while. That's the drama that happens every time in Springfield. Remember when they used to turn the clock back? They didn't even bother doing that this year. So, but this just is completely different, I think. And I was intrigued by something that you wrote. I don't know if it was yesterday, it all blends together now, but in the last day or two, you've written about supermajorities in both chambers racked by infighting, which really looks to me like Democrats against Democrats. And we saw some just really odd, well, I guess infighting is the word, but things that didn't work out the way Mike Madigan thought they would work out. What's going on there?
Well, I mean, the backstory with all of that is that Madigan drew up, with the help of Senate President John Cullerton, an overall fiscal 17 spending plan that the governor immediately rejected and said was $7.5 billion out of balance. But it had a little bit of everything for everybody. And
so it's a little more like a wish list.
A total wish list. Yeah. And so it wound up getting out of the House comfortably, but then it just sat and sat and sat in the Senate. And even though the Senate is the upper legislative chamber in Illinois, they have a bit of an inferiority complex there because they are just years and years and years of being spoon-fed by Mike Madigan. And a lot of members who've been around a long time are resentful of that. And so, when they see this gigantic budget bill coming to them in an election year that doesn't have any way to pay for it, they know immediately, hey, this is a problem. We could wind up suffering, in the fall. They also were resentful, I think, that their leader, Cullerton, was part of this. Without, you know, the Senate was dealt out entirely of any input. And so when this thing came up for a vote, it got smeared. And so that then, you know, kind of everybody's jaw hit the floor. I think, you know, in the governor's office, I think they were a bit taken aback by how that happened. And then, you know, and then there was another funding plan that was more aligned with what the governor was talking about. It was just a straight up school funding plan to get the schools opened. And that got out of the Senate, but then it got smeared in the House. And so you just, you would expect that kind of behavior if, you know, one chamber was controlled by Republicans and the other was by Democrats, but here it's the Democrats, and that's exactly what Rauner wants to see. He wants that infighting.
And he's done everything he can to promote it. So congratulations to the governor for seeding that. But the House members, they've got all their own issues because they're up for election in November, right? All of them and many of the senators. But you know, the governor's made it very clear that he's going to run candidates against them and is doing so, right? So that's one of the things that I found really interesting about yesterday was how the governor just kind of like just immediately switched into campaign mode. I mean, he didn't waste a minute. He was out on the trail. Yeah,
oh, clearly. And you know, and I think everybody, you know, while the focus in Chicago clearly back in the primary was on the Ken Duncan race, you know, I think legislators look at that and say, yeah, Madigan was able to win that race against Rauner. But the fact is that it took $5 or $6 million in spending, and most of these legislators have no means to get that kind of money. They're completely dependent on Madigan and the unions to come up with it, and everybody's like, if we can avoid that fight, we would love to avoid that fight. So yeah, Rauner does have a little bit of leverage that way, but it's just, you know, what we're seeing right now is just this deadlock we've had since really the beginning of 15 when Rauner came into office. It's just a continuation of that, and I don't see any immediate end to it in Springfield. Especially given the fact that it doesn't look, from everything I've read, and largely I get my information from reading you guys, but I'm sorry. Well, you and the august Chicago Tribune, but no, you know, the balance of power is unlikely to shift in the House or the Senate after this next race, right? I mean, the numbers will change a little bit, but Madigan will still be in control of the House, and Cullerton will probably still be in charge of the Senate. Isn't that almost a given? It's a given, but what I think most people are trying to, what the people are watching is whether or not Madigan will be able to get a functioning supermajority. Because right now he's got 71 members, which is the bare minimum you need for a supermajority. But with Duncan, and he's got a couple of suburban Democrats that never vote with him on fiscal issues. You know, he can't block these things that Rauner wants to do or override vetoes. And so, you know, it's given Madigan a bit of a luxury up to this point because he's you know, forced Rauner to wear the collar for things, but that's what Madigan is trying to get, I think, is a functioning supermajority.
Well, isn't the, and I don't mean to do your job, isn't the school issue a pressure point? What happens to the Democrats and the Republicans if there's no schools open come November? I mean, don't they both get tarred and feathered? They both get tarred and feathered, and I think it's more of a danger for Rauner because people traditionally either give credit or blame to the governor, and you know, we saw last year where the only real budgetary relief that came through was the K12 budget. You know, they passed it to him, he signed it, and that's what he's desperately wanting to have happen again. I think for Rauner, there's real danger if, you know, not so much like if Chicago doesn't open it, it would create headlines, but for him downstate, those districts like in Peoria and Decatur and Champaign, those general areas are Republican, you know, outside of them, the Republican areas. He's got to, that's part of his base. He's got to appease them. And that's probably why he was barnstorming down in those areas yesterday, trying to say that this is all the Democrats' fault, that they did this. And I found it as a Chicagoan a little bit off-putting that the governor was going to these small towns and saying, you folks here who pay your taxes and who are good working people, your money is just going up to Chicago so those rats up there can eat your money. I mean, I
work and I pay taxes and I live in Chicago and I'm probably not the only one. I don't get the politics of that at all.
Oh, it's a time-honored thing downstate where you know, if you want to run against Chicago, it's a sure way to get elected. Yeah. And that's the Cardies playing.
Yeah, he infuriated, or at least, you know, it looks like he infuriated Alderman Howard Brookins, who's chairman of the City Council Education Committee, African American, and he said that there was racially tinged because 82% of the students in the Chicago public schools are either African American or Latino, minorities of various kinds, and that he was, you know, pitting one group of people against another. The mayor compared him to Trump, so he's playing a risky gambit where he's escalating the sort of warfare and making it more difficult for anyone to come together.
I guess, Dave, that's part of the reason why I'm not understanding the time-honored envelope into which this all fits of just blame Chicago. It doesn't quite work here because, as you've already pointed out, so many of the school districts in Illinois are just as impoverished as the Chicago school system and have the same problems, just maybe on a smaller scale. So it's not, you can't just say all the school systems in Illinois are fine. It's just that corrupt, miserable Chicago school system that's not, you know. There are lots of suburbs that are the same way. There are many small towns and medium-sized towns, Rockford, Peoria, that have lots of problems.
Oh yeah, very definitely. They're you know, public education is a mess statewide, and you know, that's why we saw this activity at the end of session to try to, you know, change the school funding formula. That failed, but I think what Rauner wants to do, what his strategy is to get that K-12 plan, you know, to his desk and signed before all of this happens. And on the final day of session down there, you know, his budget director, you know, released this framework that included, you know, we'll spend a little bit of money that we have left over for fiscal 16, you know, that would get us through the end of June, and then fiscal 17, you know, we'll do the school piece of this. And the Democrats just rejected it outright. They're like, no, we got bigger plans. But the irony is that may be what people gravitate back toward, because, you know, the most significant piece of that was that, you know, Rauner didn't attach any items or any planks from his turnaround agenda to that, which a lot of rank and file Democrats were saying, hooray, you know, let's look at this. And so I think it might have a little bit of life.
And I really want to bring Rahm Emanuel into this discussion because until even last week, I think a lot of us were thinking, where is the mayor? I mean, I've said here on the show that in my lifetime, I'm accustomed to the mayor having a very big footprint down in Springfield when these things are happening, and I haven't perceived that Rahm Emanuel was, but maybe he has been all along.
Well, the mayor was asked about that last week, and he said that he's Facebooking people, he's calling them, he's constantly working the phones. He made a point of it Monday, or Tuesday it was, I guess. He was sort of declaring victory because they overrode the governor's veto of his police and fire bill, which would give the city a little more time and keep property taxes lower for the time being. And he said, I've been working that really hard, and now I got to cut off this press conference because I have to go back to the phones. You know, so he is trying to project the image of working it, and I can tell you, he is working the phones. I think one thing you never do as a politician is you don't go down there and actually, you know, be seen in person pushing for something if you're not 100% sure it's going to happen, because then you look weak.
Then you're a loser, as we say today.
Yes.
But I think this was, I mean, am I wrong in my perception that was a huge victory for Rahm Emanuel getting that override?
Well, it was the one time.
We should talk about what it was, what happened.
Yeah, it's a police and fire bill. It gives the city 15 more years to bring financial health back to the police and fire funds, which are woefully underfunded. They're about more than $10 billion short in money, and they would go broke within 7 or 8 years without more money. But the mayor agreed. He passed a property tax increase last year, the record high property tax increase, to put money into those. But at the same time, it wasn't enough to pay them down under the current schedule, which would have been 25 years. He wanted it extended to 40 years so he doesn't have to raise those property taxes any further. The bill would have done that. Was passed a year ago by the House and Senate. They were afraid to send it to him for fear to the governor, for fear that Rauner would veto it amid this stalemate as leverage. And indeed, he did. And earlier, before he vetoed it, he said, you know, I could sign this if I get part of my agenda. So he did use it as leverage. He vetoed it.
So it wasn't just a flat-out ideological veto. It was a...
No, he portrayed it that way. He said it'll cost billions of dollars more because you're extending it out long and the debt will continue to build for a longer period of time. There's some truth in that, and you can add in present values, and the city would argue that it's somewhere in the middle, but it does cost more. Okay, but the mayor's point is that this is what we can afford to do now. So he did that, and as Dave can point out, probably with tons of examples, the legislature, Madigan's been unable to override certain vetoes, but they were able to override this. They got I think 3 Republican votes on that. Folks who said, well, you know, I don't want to be the guy that's, one of them was from Chicago, so he didn't want to be responsible for raising property taxes. The other 2 said, you know, it makes sense to do it this way, and they were able to override. So it was a big victory for the mayor, and then now he has to deal with the Chicago Public Schools issue. So because he's going to take the blame too.
So are we seeing an outbreak of independent thought going on in Springfield? Here you have staunch Republicans from what I assume are pretty good Republican districts saying, well, you know, what the governor's doing is going to make the people in Chicago raise their taxes, and above all else, as a Republican, I'm against raising taxes. I mean, that's independent thinking?
Well, it was, and that override was surprising. I mean, there were 3 Republicans, as Hal points out, that were pivotal to the override. One, Mike McAuliffe, he lives in the northwest, on the northwest side, in a pocket that, you know, cops and firefighters live in mass. He voted for that bill when it passed in 2015, so that his support of the override was not surprising. The 2 that caught people off guard were David Harris. He's an Arlington Heights Republican who has been in Springfield for probably 30 years. And then the other one is a guy from Barrington named David McSweeney. And both of them are you know, independent thinkers, but they caught their leadership off guard. They caught Governor Rauner off guard. And you know, it's rare that you see Madigan coming out of a meeting, you know, on this budget stuff, gloating. I mean, after that happened, I mean.
Well, he can't exactly take any credit for this.
Well, I mean, you know, I think it was, you know, it was him and Rom, and you know, clearly they were doing all sorts of things. But you know, to hear Madigan come out and chortle about how, you know, I didn't bring this issue up with the governor when we were talking about the budget because I was taught as a child not to cause people embarrassment, because that's rude, you know.
And now I'm announcing it to the entire world.
But then, I mean, the great thing about that narrative.
I hope he's not embarrassed.
Exactly. But like, you know, it was like one of those incredible senses of political whiplash, because less than 24 hours, then Madigan is just taking it on the chin, you know, after this victory in the override. He gets slammed.
So neither of them, neither Madigan nor Rauner, can really say that they've come out of this with any kind of solid victories for their side, can they, or can they?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, I do think that things will gravitate slowly back to this scheme that Rauner has floated to do a little bit of spending for fiscal 16, and then, you know, a K through 12 budget for fiscal 17. I think that's where they gravitate back toward. But they have, it's like a chessboard where there are 2 kings, and that's all that's left on the board. You know, we're just chasing each other across the board. You know.
Are we seeing something new happening here? Are we seeing something, or is this just a one-off thing? Is it just something that isn't going to happen again?
I think what it shows, what that example shows, and what you know, the fighting on the Democratic side shows, is that there's a great amount of strain being caused by all of this just standstill, you know, this standstill we have going on. Rank and file Republicans hate it. Rank and file Democrats hate it. The Democrats hate it because, you know, the social service programs that they rely upon in their areas are going, you know, bankrupt, and the universities and the MAP students. The Republicans have most of the universities downstate are all in Republican districts. Those guys are acutely feeling the strain of the budget impasse. And so, you know, it's like the rank and file, while many of them are driven ideologically, there are still a few pragmatic ones in the bunch. They're like, make this stop, you know. And in McSweeney and certainly in Harris, on the Republican side, you saw examples. Those 2 are very pragmatic with their votes, you know.
Is time on the side of Rauner or Madigan and I guess also, you know, the Senate too. I mean, who is time going to be most favorable to?
Well, I think it's Madigan, because, you know, Madigan institutionally is going nowhere. He looks like he's a man in his 50s. Honestly, if you stand next to him, physically he is in ideal shape. You could see him doing this for another 10 or 15 years, you know? Yeah. He's not probably going to go anywhere. And in Rauner, he's approaching the midterm of his first term in office, and he wants to run again. And if he wants to run again, he's got to have something to show for what he's done. I mean, you can, you know, so far he's been saying, well, hey, I've stood up to Mike Madigan and I've blocked him from jamming through this record tax increase. And there are plenty of people out there, believe me, that love that. But I think there's a certain level of frustration. If there's a competent Democrat who steps forward and challenges Rauner, he's in serious trouble.
Like maybe a sitting senator or something?
That name's been kicked around, Senator Durbin.
His name has been kicked all over the place, hasn't it? But I'm just curious about the degree to which Rauner can continue to push this, you know, his turnaround agenda when he really, I mean, as far as I can tell, he hasn't really been able to get any of it into effect. And if he just keeps saying, I'll do this and I'll do that if you'll pass some of my turnaround agenda, and they just keep saying, no, I mean, where does that leave us all? I just don't know. Yeah,
well, I think, you know, we've seen signs, you know, there have been a few moments where he's pulled back on that because he had to, because it was a desperate enough situation budget-wise where he had to get stopgap spending put in place, and that's really been the only pressure.
And the failure to have a budget belies his theme of fiscal responsibility, because every day that we don't have a budget, the debts grow, the interest on the debt grows, the problem of the state of Illinois becomes worse. There's more risk of the debt ratings going down.
Well, I mean, a place like, you know, Maryville Academy, that's a good example. I mean, the Tribune had a story about that. They've been in operation since the late 1800s. You know, they're not taking wards of the state anymore because they want to get paid, you know.
I don't know. It's a very complicated situation, and I just don't have any sense of where. I just don't know how we get out of the impasse. I don't know who has to break first for this to happen.
Yeah, it's like Groundhog Day, but there's no Bill Murray trying to do better every day. They keep just doing the same old things and thinking they'll win that way.
Yeah, it's a test of wills, and I don't, you know, neither Rauner nor Madigan, those are the two principals. Yeah. Neither one of them is willing to blink one iota. And
if Rauner is able to peel off, let's just say 3 or 4 House members and switch them from Democrat to Republican, does that change the dynamic at all? Or does it leave it pretty much like it is?
Leaves it like it is. I mean, you know, Madigan right now, as I said, he has 71 members, and it takes 60 members to pass a bill, and in most cases. And so he's got a cushion of 11 votes there where, you know, he can still pretty much pass what he wants. But, you know, in order to override, he's got to have at least 71 votes. You know, if Rauner picks up, you know, 3 or 4 seats, he'll be able to have vetoes that stand. But most of his vetoes have stood. So.
Okay, you know what? Let's change subject. We got a couple of minutes left, just because this is something that broke yesterday that I think is really important in politics in Illinois. The court held that Mayor Emanuel, your newspaper, sued because Mayor Emanuel was transmitting messages on his private device. And the court held, Hal, what did they say?
Well, the court rejected the city's effort to dismiss the Chicago Tribune suit. And the suit was seeking, under the Illinois Freedom of Information Act, emails and text messages from his personal phone, personal devices, that had to do not with anything personal, but with city business. And the circuit court judge ruled that she rejected the city's attempt to dismiss and said that just because they're on a personal device doesn't mean they're exempt from the Freedom of Information Act law, that because they deal with city business, they are subject to FOIA, and they let the case proceed. The city will continue to fight it. But if it holds, it's a way to sort of stop public officials from working the way around the intent of the FOIA law, which is that certain records should be public so that the people that are governed know what the people they elected are doing.
Yeah.
But it's you know, one thing you can say about our politicians, they are a very resourceful lot, because you know, the second there'll be this, you know, victory for the First Amendment, but then they'll figure out, and many of them I think are using a system or an app called Snapchat, right? We know what that does. It, you know, it disappears, and they're still able to communicate, but you know, there's no tracks.
Where do you come down on this idea that, let's just say the police superintendent really needs to talk to the mayor for a couple of minutes about something really awful or disturbing that's happened, and they really don't want this to be a public record. He just wants to brief the mayor on something, and they want to get a reaction, and they want to make a quick plan about how they're going to handle this. Is that something that should the public be able to witness that?
There's this new technology, it's called a telephone.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to give these guys ideas, but I'm always amazed when people put in emails, put in texts. You know, typically when you want to talk about something sensitive, you make a telephone call, you can say, yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah. Well, and there's a provision in the FOIA where if it's a preliminary idea or whatever, you know,
like a draft.
Right. I mean, and Hal, you've had as many, you know, FOIA responses coming to you and emails where it's just like a solid block of black that gets redacted because, you know, there's an exemption like that.
Right. And how do we know if what they redacted was really exempt or not?
Yeah, there's no
Well, because you trust them.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we have the public access counselor, right? But then again, we don't know, you know, we don't know what they're seeing.
No, I mean, I think it is a very big victory, but it just raises this interesting question about the technology world that we live in now, where there are so many different avenues that you're going to spend the next 5 years just tracking down every new technology and making that a part of it. But you're right, Snapchat is the way to handle stuff you don't want the public to know.
Well, is the city going to appeal?
It's a preliminary ruling, so the case actually hasn't yet gone to trial. She just denied their motion to dismiss, so it'll presumably go to a full-scale trial, or you know, they'll come to terms on releasing some of this information that the Tribune is seeking. So they can't. I mean, I guess they could do an interlocutory appeal, which means before the case is done. That's pretty unusual. I assume they'll go to trial, and then if they lose at that level, then I would expect them to appeal. You know, so. This is one of those things that the Illinois Supreme Court could decide. But I think courts around the nation have generally ruled in favor of the First Amendment in these cases.
So as they say in television news, we'll just have to wait and see. Well, thank you guys. Thanks so much for being here today. I really appreciate you coming by to just kind of give us a briefing on what's been happening in the last 48 hours in Springfield. It's crazy. Hal Dardick from the Chicago Tribune, thanks for being here again. We'll see you again soon and sometime, I hope.
Thanks for having me.
And Dave McKinney from Reuters. Great to have you here, Dave. Thanks for doing this. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It is a service of CAN TV. You can watch us anytime you want, on demand. Just go to this address that you see on your screen right now, and you can watch us at any time, which is very convenient, don't you think? And we'll be back again next week with yet another show right here on Chicago Newsroom. Thanks for watching. I'm Ken Davis. See you next week. Bye-bye.